Call this meeting of the Committee on the Council as a whole to order. Members present this evening: Councilor Hay, Councilor Muniz-Tebow, Councilor Reynolds, Councilor Carboni, Councilor Boisvert, Councilor Di Natale, Councilor Caddy, Councilor Tran, Councilor Clark, and myself. Councilor Bean would like to have made it to this evening's meeting, but he had prior engagement that he just could not get out of, and I know that that doesn't make this any less important to him because he's mentioned it to me over the last 2 months that he wanted to be here this evening and try to rearrange the schedule, but trying to get 11 people to agree to a schedule is virtually impossible today, so he wasn't able to attend. On the agenda tonight is the 2013 budget. I guess I will open it up for discussion. Councilor Hay.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask the mayor, there are some recommended cuts, not recommended, people have proposed cuts that we'll be voting on tonight if people make proposals, make motions on them specifically. I'm not one who would cut simply for the sake of cutting. And I would like to ask the mayor that if this council were to cut money from this budget this evening, what the mayor's intentions are regarding those fundings. I personally believe that the fire department overtime account is going to be short next year, at least a couple $100,000, if not more, looking at last year's budget and this year's budget, and was wondering if the mayor would consider proposed cuts, taking that money and putting that towards the fire department overtime line item.
I think the first thing is I'm not sure we're going to be short by that much, by a couple $100,000. That seems like that would be a bit too high. So I think I'll defer to the chief about his thoughts regarding the overtime budget for the fire department.
I think we're over 260,000 so far this year, and we've got 2 less people now. This budget has 2 less positions. We're at 76 currently. We'll be at 74. We do have a couple injuries ongoing, and there are a few people talking about retirements. I had requested the mayor $300,000 in the overtime, barring any unforeseen things. I think that would be still accurate, and I believe we're budgeted at $225.
We're budgeted at $225, so certainly $75,000 allocation would bring that up to the $300,000, and I think I'm looking at $85,000 in possible cuts. So I would say the cuts would probably go to a supplemental budget for fire overtime.
Thank you.
My only comment, I know I have one item on there myself. I won't be making a motion to take that out of there. The budget, as we've gone through it, is what it is. We've had our discussions. We've vetted it. I think we did a good job. I think the mayor's office and the finance team did a good job of putting this budget together. We'll let the chips fall where they may, and that one being the $70,000 out of the 85. I guess if you choose to move that money into another account, then I guess that's your prerogative over the next year, but I won't be making a motion to take the employee benefit unemployment money out. Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've actually prepared a statement for this vote tonight. The fiscal 2013 budget proposal is one that is not structurally balanced. Structurally balanced budget is where all operating expenses are funded fully by recurring revenues. The FY13 proposal currently requires that $1.45 million of one-time or non-recurring revenues be used to balance the budget. This consists of $750,000 in one-time free cash from the prior fiscal year and $700,000 from the overlay surplus account. While conservative revenue projections have allowed the city to obtain comfortable surpluses in the last few years, which is both positive and necessary, continued reliance on non-recurring revenues to match recurring expenses is the wrong financial policy the city continues to employ and places the city at risk. Reliance on free cash to balance an operating budget must cease. This budget continues that reliance. Projections are for an additional free cash be used to balance the budget in the amount of $750,000 per year, so there is no drop-off in sight. One-time free cash should never be used to balance an operating budget. Historically, the reliance on free cash to balance the budget has doubled since FY10. The city is also employing the use of overlay surplus revenues, which are also considered one-time. Each year, the city establishes an account known as overlay reserve to fund anticipated property tax abatements, exemptions, and uncollected taxes that fiscal year. Any balance in the overlay account in excess of the amount remaining to be collected or abated can be transferred to the overlay surplus account. At the end of each fiscal year, unused overlay surplus is closed to surplus revenue and becomes a part of free cash. This is also a policy that should cease. I take note of the fact that in FY10, the city did not rely on any overlay surplus funds to balance the budget. Then in FY11, $450,000 was used. In FY12, $500,000 was used. And now in FY13, $700,000 is to be used, a 40% increase. The next 2 years after, the city plans to use over $1 million additionally to balance future budgets with this account. It is important to bring these facts to light to the public and City Council to give an understanding that without this $1.45 million in one-time revenues, many items funded via the supplemental budget last October would not be possible. Clearly, we cannot sustain these services through recurring revenue streams. Therefore, the city is at risk indefinitely in the event there is another economic downturn and/or state aid declines. To put this budget truly into balance, painful cuts of $1.45 million would have to be made. This budget also does not address any funding mechanism or approach to covering the overwhelming unfunded liability known as other and post-employment benefits, or OPEB. The city currently has over $180 million in unfunded liabilities for OPEB. Unless unions continue to agree to additional health care savings, a funding mechanism each fiscal year to pay down this liability, much like what we do for each year for pensions, is the only other option. Currently, the city has no funding plan to pay for this liability. The likely approach is we will have to fund this liability via our operating budget, and this may require hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. The city currently is on the hook for $275 million in total unfunded liabilities, two-thirds of which have no funding plan. Lastly, it should be noted that the City of Fitchburg is currently underfunding the public schools, or under the required net school spending threshold by a projected $620,000. This deficit does not go away and carries over into the next fiscal year if the requirement is not met. So far through FY11, we have met our requirement, but it is undeniably a risk the city continues to undertake by not funding the schools at 100%. Through accounting measures such as transfers and encumbrances, along with working together with the schools, the city has been able to cover the projected deficit without having it carry over. However, the projection for this upcoming fiscal year is almost triple what it was for FY12. If any of that $620 is not covered, the city will have to find more money on the city side to pay for it. A budget not structurally balanced and underfunding the public schools by several hundred thousands of dollars is a financially weak and risky plan to move forward with. The June 15, 2012 Moody's Investor Service Bond Report further validates these concerns by identifying major challenges the city faces, among which are continued reliance on appropriated free cash to balance operating budgets and sizable pension and OPEB liabilities. For all these stated reasons, I will be voting against this budget plan. Thank you.
Councilor Hay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Following up on Councilor Di Natale's comments, I would like to state that I was disappointed that there is no line item for the OPEB payment. This council, at least 4 or 5 months ago, sent a resolution to the mayor requesting that she put something in the budget to start a fund to pay that. You know, for years I asked for a stabilization account to be funded, and the mayor a few years ago started that, and we've done well with that, and it's grown, and we're starting to help ourselves. I think a line item for the OPEB was appropriate and should have occurred, and I would hope that during the coming year, the mayor and the finance team find a way to put that into next year's budget, because as the councilor stated, we're getting further and further behind, and it will cost us down the road. And I understand we're making cuts and changes, and that number sometimes gets reduced through negotiations, but that number is still there, and we do need to address it. Thank you.
Councilor Reynolds.
I'd just like to make a comment, or propose a question, if I may, through you, Mr. President, to the councilor that spoke the written statement. Given your penetrating analysis, do you have suggestions to make to the mayor that you would find helpful? I noted that the mayor did send us all a notice asking for our comments and our suggestions, and there's a flexibility there that can be worked with. So prior to voting no, are there suggestions that you could propose that would be helpful?
Mr. President, to answer the councilor's question, the first area I would cut is the snow and ice reserve, $400,000. That is a reserve account that we're allowed to deficit spend on, and we never really put that in there before. It's not a bad thing that it's in there, but you can make the argument that we're funding for a lot of these things through non-recurring revenues. So my problem is, through a budgetary policy standpoint, is we have an operating budget that's recurring. It should be matched by recurring revenues. It's not being matched by recurring revenues. $1.5 million of this budget is being balanced on one-time free cash revenues, which we end up getting every year, but it's a very risky venture, because if we have another downturn, or if we have another tough year, tough choices are going to have to be made again. This should be no surprise to anybody, because last October, when we had the supplemental budget, some of us had a general disagreement on that budget request. I asked at that time for proof, thorough evidence that we could sustain these things long term. It wasn't provided. And after looking at this budget, $1.5 million is covering this budget. You take that $1.5 million out, you have a structurally balanced budget. Recurring revenues cover recurring expenses. It's not the case now, and it won't be the case for the next 3 years. So all the things that we added back in October are being paid for, but they're not being paid for in a firm fashion. So it's a very risky venture to take, one that we've been fortunate to be okay with. Now, my suggestion, first off, is the politically unfavorable suggestion is to make the cuts, to get us within balance. I would start with that $400,000 as a starting point. The rest we would have to discuss further, but that's where I would start, to get that down to $1 million. Politically, I don't think anyone's willing to do that, because that would result in things that we added a few months ago that will have to be cut again, possibly. But that's where I would start. But the fact is, this budget's not structurally balanced. It hasn't been for a couple of years, and it won't be for the next 2 years, based on the math. And this isn't my opinion. This is a fact. That is what a structured budget is. It's not covered by one-time revenues, ever. We're doing that. These are facts. This is not my opinion. Thank you.
Councilor Reynolds.
I yield to the mayor. I see she indicated that she'd like to speak.
Sure. So I want to put this in the context of reality. The first is if you cut for example, if you cut a snow and ice reserve, or whether you increase it, but you don't change your actual habits, it's not actually going to do anything to the bottom line. Because if you cut the snow and ice reserve, if we only spend half of it, then we only spend half of it. The other 200 goes into free cash. Or if you don't spend it in the first place, then it's there, but then you're still going to spend the 200 because you're still going to have the same snow. So we'll ask for the 200. So at the end of the day, if you're spending 600 out of 800, you're still going to have 200,000 no matter what account it's in. The only way to actually create a quote-unquote structurally balanced budget is to actually make those cuts. You can make those cuts. But here's the thing. We also have to understand that having a balanced budget, you can have a balanced budget and you can have a good budget, and it doesn't necessarily have to be structural. It would be nice if it was a structural budget. However, there are actually downsides to a structural budget. A structural budget may be perfect or may look great in the financial realm of things, but actually it doesn't. It actually could put you in greater financial peril if you don't actually change your actions. So for example, if I said, starting on July 1st, we will start spending money, which is the budget portion, based on revenues that we will earn after July 1st. That's a structurally balanced budget. So you're going to approve spending for money we have not received. What we're doing here, what we've done is I've said, I've already saved the money. So when I ask you to spend money, I will have already funded a portion of that. So which one is more structurally sound? Actually, the latter. Which one is actually a structural budget? The former. So it's not as simple as saying, let's start with cutting a reserve when the snow is going to be what the snow is. The bottom line is that I have to work in reality. The reality that I work in is that I have to provide the best services possible, and I have to provide the changes and the negotiations, the chasing after grants to make it possible. This is the 5th year of, I would say, good budgets, because we have changed every year. You cannot just have something that is going to be in perpetuity. Even if this was a perfectly structural budget, which means that you spend money when you earn it, rather than quote unquote saving it and then making those decisions first, we do have a structurally or a unstructurally sound budget because we have expenses that are going up beyond our revenue sources. And those are things that I continue to talk about, and those are things that I've continued to address. Have we been able to address things permanently? No. And no one has been able to do that yet, because these are deep-seated issues that everyone in the private sector and the public sector are facing right now. But the reality is, are we making progress? Yes. The criticisms that you could have of today's budget, guess what? Those were the same criticisms that you could make 10 years ago and 50 years ago. What's the difference between today and 10 years ago and 50 years ago? Today, I'm bringing it forward to you. I'm bringing you the big picture. I'm bringing you the areas in which there are cliffs and there are danger signs. These danger signs that we are facing today did not start with us. And have we solved them all? Absolutely not. Have we begun to solve them one by one? Absolutely. One of those things that we've solved is the reserve budget for snow and ice. Because yes, you can deficit spend, but when you're saying our issue is a deficit, so let's deficit spend. That's actually not a solution. So again, I have to work in reality, and you might make a suggestion or a statement that says, you know, this looks like it's good, but you know what, I'll be right there to tell you exactly how it's going to play out. So have we been able to actually solve all future budget woes? No. But this is actually the first year that we've actually put forward future budgets for you to consider. That's a step in the right direction. That means that we are working towards solutions. So these are going to be budgets that I am going to have to put forward. These are challenges that I have faced in a bigger scale in previous years. We have been able to meet those challenges. So believe it or not, we have had state budget cuts, we've had revenue shortfalls, and we are also addressing capital items. We are building a stabilization fund, and we are maintaining the services as best we can. We could not say that in previous years when we had more money, when there wasn't an economic downturn, when there was no money in the bank and no snow and ice reserve, and no one even knew what OPEB was. You guys know what that is, because we're looking to address that. We're looking to address those things. It doesn't mean that we can solve them overnight. And when they've been created for decades, I think the first thing to do is acknowledge that they exist and then to work towards them. We are working towards them. If we try and solve them all at once, absolutely correct, it will be painful. But that's where I have to balance between having those severe cuts and saying we're going to build them back up slowly. Is it going to be easy? No. But did I say that I am going to commit to maintaining the services that we added last year? In the budget, we did it. Am I going to commit to maintaining them next year and the year after that? Absolutely. Am I going to do it by sitting on my hands? No, I'm not. That's the work that I do day in and day out. I don't just look at the numbers on the paper. We look at real solutions. And right now, as you can see, the one item that's out there is, let's start with deficit spending to address a deficit. So again, I'm working in reality and need real things. such as saying that we're going to have to permanently cut things. We permanently cut the library budget. We permanently cut police and fire through restructuring. We're going to permanently cut the streetlight budget, but doesn't mean we actually can't build up those services by doing things that are much more cost effective. So one thing that I do want to address is the OPEB fund. As you know, one of our goals is to build up our stabilization fund to about 5% of the budget. When we reach that minimum, we've been able to almost put aside close to $1 million a budget cycle. So that's pretty good. So what I'm going to say is once we get up to that $5 million, we will now have choices. When we have those funds, we can say, do we want to put that in stabilization and continue to grow that? Or do we want to start paying off the OPEB liability? Or do we want to start putting that in roads? Or do we want to start putting those in services? Or do we want to start putting those in capital items and so on? These are things that we're going to work hard to give you the choices to be able to figure out how we are going to actually fund all of these things. But like I said, you know, I can't just cut everything and say we're going to just focus on OPEB and stabilization and capital and so on. What I said is, okay, we're starting the stabilization, we're starting to do capital items, you know, the OPEB is next, and putting $100,000 when it's $185 million for me as a one-time, not going to cut it for me. I want a continuous funding source. So if we've been able to really fight and scrape and put aside almost $1 million a year in stabilization, then I want to be able to continue to do that, so then we can say, where are we going to put that $1 million now? Because that is much more substantial. That's much more structural.
Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you, Mr. President. With all due respect to everyone in this room, my 8 years of budgetary finance experience, I've never heard the term structurally balanced budget may be a bad thing. I've never heard that. The fact is, that's the fact. I can't believe I just heard that structuring this budget where what you know you'll spend versus what you're going to take in is poorer than relying every year on one-time money. I can't believe I heard that, but I guess that's the policy right now. The mayor's own admission, as well as the auditor, the last few years was, we don't want to continue doing this. If the mayor believes that a structured budget is not the best way to go, why does the mayor continue to tell us that she's looking to drop that amount down every year? Why does the latest Moody's investor report tell the city that one of the big black marks financially is you're relying on one-time revenues to balance an operating budget? This is a major United States investment firm saying this. This isn't just me. I guess we have a disagreement, the mayor and I, on how to go forward with this. I suggested the snow and ice first because, again, there are things we're doing in this budget that we cannot do without one-time money. We have a snow and ice reserve account because we're using one-time money. We're funding the library because we're using one-time money. It's not an easy solution, and I don't envy the mayor's position in this. And I thank her very much for being forthcoming with all the information she's provided to us and giving us her opinion, because now I know very well where she's going with this. It's a matter of disagreement, but I've never heard a structured budget is not the best approach. I've never heard that, and Moody's would agree. The only other thing I would say is I have never heard the terminology OPEB in the 4.5 years I've been here. I've never heard it. I found that on the state website when I was doing my research. That's how I found out about it. So when I'm told in chambers that we've had knowledge of these things, no, we have not. I'm just trying to point out the facts to everybody and educate the public on this. Because, again, 3 years ago, we didn't use free cash. We didn't use overlay surplus 3 years ago. The question is why? If it's acceptable to do this, why didn't we always do it? The auditor told me it was risky too. It's also risky that we're not funding the schools 100%. It always is. So I'm just trying to be, I'm trying to look ahead and try and lower the risks on us. Painful decisions would have to be made, I understand that. But, again, to say that we shouldn't have a structurally balanced budget where firm revenues match firm expenses, I'm a little surprised by that. I can't believe I heard that. Thank you.
Any further discussion, councilors? Councilor Reynolds.
Perhaps, I really appreciate the conversation. Perhaps the difference is that the experience in the private sector may be different, is a different animal than the public sector, where the public sector depends upon tax revenue. And that perhaps is, I've heard all the time that I'm here that a lot of our expenditures are one-time monies received. We seem to go along on that basis of lots of things. The fire, the police department, all these grants, they're one-time offerings. It's a mode of operation that's available to the government to seek. And I think we've been strongly encouraged by the mayor to increase our awareness of what might be out there for us. But that's different than a stream of income from a product made and sold. Thank you.
A motion? Do we already have a motion?
No, we don't.
Councilor Reynolds.
I do want to bring up one other thing, which is in familiar terms, they would say is an elephant in the room. And I would like to see comment on from other councilors and from the mayor on the increase in salary for the fire chief. From the previous conversations, I understood that though the chief's position, I'm trying to take a personality out of this and just say the position itself, was funded, there was an appropriate or a reasonable recompense for the position. But because of our financial straits, it was met in patch fashion. Something from here, something from there, something from there. And you add the other sources together, and it came to what I think you would have to say is a reasonable pain. Now, the only question that I see, now we're saying, well, we're going to stop the patchwork, and we're going to give a straight salary, an increase in the salary, which the only question that I would like to ask about is, what is the increased burden on our pension obligations if we do this? The other way, it didn't evidently didn't increase the pension burden. Am I correct in my analysis of that? When you recompensed the position from 3 different sources, but now the straight out salary does have a pension effects. Am I correct?
To calculate the impact on pension costs, I mean, this is why we do an actuarial study every year, is somebody's impact is different if they retire tomorrow or if they retire in 10 years. There could also, because it's based on, let's say, the last few years, you know, one could have a 0% increase for 30 years and then suddenly have a 30% increase, and it would be based on that last, you know, salary piece. Or you could have a much more, I would say, linear model where that's like, let's say, you know, a 0.5% increase every single year. But again, if you end up at the same point, that's essentially what your pension liability is. And of course, it's different given your years of service. So I cannot speak to one individual because I don't know when this one individual is going to retire, and when the individuals retire, I don't know where they're going to be in terms of their salary. Anytime that there is a cost of living increase, anytime that there is a step increase, every time somebody is employed by the city for 1 year longer and has that increased salary, that increases pension costs. That's why we have a line item where we're supposed to be setting aside a certain amount to fund those pension costs. What we're also doing is we're also going backwards and funding things that we should have funded in the past, so that we wouldn't have both our current costs plus the makeup costs for the past. That's sort of what we're dealing with now. So I can't answer your question specifically as to the additional pension burden. I mean, unfortunately, I've used the example where, I used the example before about where, even elected officials in the past. So, for example, if somebody else ran for mayor, and they'd worked for the city for a long time, and they're in this position, guess what? You might have increased our pension costs by 6 figures. Somebody young like myself, not really going to be an impact. So should I say, you know what, all of you, gee, you should vote for somebody younger because, and especially if I'm not going to be mayor for 40 years, there's so many different factors that are dependent. I just want to just say that and put it aside, and also say that I think, to talk about the mechanisms of how it works, to talk about how the actuarial studies are done, we can talk about that in a separate session. If you want me to answer the question specifically about the fire chief, I'll answer the same way that I've done in the past. The role of the fire chief has increased multifold. In the few years that I've been here, we've seen one individual have to take over the duties of having 2/3 less rank and file. So when you have one chief that used to be able to be supported in management by 12 deputy chiefs and 12 captains, and now there are only 4 of each, that's 16 less people to do the management. The fire department has also taken on additional duties in terms of their role in terms of emergency response, medical care, and so on. So instead of having 8 more deputy chiefs to be at the fires, to write the grants, to oversee emergency response, instead of having 8 additional captains, instead of having, I can't remember how many less lieutenants we have, somebody has to take on those roles. So if you're a manager, you might say, gee, I'm running a restaurant, and, instead of having a staff of 30, I have a staff of 10. You might say that manager should make less because they have a smaller staff. Well, not if the work hasn't changed. If the work hasn't changed, that means that everybody is doing more. And in particular, one of the ways that we've been able to structurally keep down the costs in both police and fire is that we have restructured. We have taken away senior management positions. Some positions, like there's a fire prevention position where a deputy chief used to do, now a lieutenant does. But don't forget, there was also 7 other additional deputy chiefs that no longer exist because of that. So in looking at that, I feel that a slight adjustment in compensation for one individual to take on a role where maybe 16 other people did before is probably justified.
Thank you.
Just waiting on a motion, folks. Motion made and second to adopt this city budget for FY 2013. Any further discussion? Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to let councilors and folks know, I keep this financial review with me that the Department of Revenue prepared for us back in 2008. And in there were 23 recommendations for the city to do. And we've been hacking away at that, and I think we've done about 14 of them, which is, some of the other ones can be contested whether or not they've been done or not. But I think we're going the right way as far as the city's finances, and as far as this the budget is concerned. And I think this has been a good chart to go with. I think the Department of Revenue gave us a nice, gave us a good idea of what chart we should go in, and I think we're going that way. And people have to know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Muniz,
I think I just want to concur that, you know, I've seen a lot of the changes, the structural changes that have been made. We've negotiated contracts. We've been able to reduce expenses in different departments. We have some really amazing department heads who are getting things done effectively and prioritizing things so that, you know, we can go back to our constituents and get things done in the city. So, you know, just saying that around this budget, and as we move forward, just kind of knowing that that's there, and that, you know, I know it's impacting people's lives, and I know that we're seeing that, and I just want to put that out there.
I've been at this for 10 or 11 years now, and the first 6 years that I went through this was the most painful 2 months that I could ever possibly endure. Just the thought that that freight train was coming at us all the time, as I used to call it, that we just were going to hit financial bottom. And then when the state decided to give us $1 million less 1 year of promised state aid because they didn't get their revenues, and we hit bottom. We've come a long ways to crawl out. There was a lot of painful things that happened over the last 6 years that needed to be done, that should have been done prior to that, but they were done, and they were painful. And now some of the things are starting to be restored. There's a quality of life issue here in the city of Fitchburg that is starting to be restored. So to me, this budget starts to restore the quality of life that Fitchburg needs to start having with the library hours, the senior center hours, the police and fire on duty, the public works department, all of the things that we've had problems with that's starting to come back. So we've been painful, we paid the dues, we've been fiscally conservative in the last 6 years, so I think we're moving in the right direction. Councilor Boisvert.
Thank you. I've been on the council now for 8 years, so that means I've been through the budget session 8 times. In the past, there have been a lot of cuts, to almost every department. And it seems to me that this year, in particular, and we've been moving closer to this all along, there are a total of $75,000 proposed cuts out of $100,752. That's a drop in the bucket. So we've been sitting in these chambers arguing about the budget for weeks on end now, many meetings, and that's the most we can cut. This is the most that all of us came up with to cut. It's not worth arguing about. It really and truly isn't, because we'll make this up sometime during the year. So I believe that the proper thing to do, instead of arguing about this budget at the last moment, is to take a vote on it.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? One in opposition.
Second.
Motion made and second to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Call a special meeting of the Fitchburg City Council to order. Councilor Di Natale, if you would lead us in a salute to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, if you would call the roll, please.
President Joseph.
Here.
Councilor Bean. Councilor Beauvais.
Here.
Councilor Carbone.
Here.
Councilor Clark.
Here.
Councilor Di Natale.
Here.
Councilor Hay.
Here.
Councilor Caddy.
Here.
Councilor Reynolds. Here. Councilor Thibault Munoz. Here. Councilor Tran.
Here.
Warrant for a special meeting of the Fitchburg City Council. A special meeting of the Fitchburg City Council will be held on Tuesday, June 26, 2012, immediately following the Council as a Whole Committee, which follows the Finance Committee, to begin at 7:30 in City Council chambers. The agenda will consist of the following: an oral report as a Council of the Whole Committee regarding the following matters: final review of the Mayor's FY 2013 budget, Order 11812, Order Mayor's Fiscal Budget Operating General Funds $100 $100,752,756. Airport, $931,526. Wastewater, $10,444,349. Water, $5,344,174. Order 11912 for $750 reserved for other municipal purposes. Order 12012, $700,000 credited to the tax levy to charge against overlay reserve. 12112 ordered $212,367 against the parking meter receipts, and $74,000 treasurer's personnel services, $138,000 treasurer's expenses. 12212 for the perpetual care of the cemetery. 12312 for the airport receipts. 12412 wastewater and water. 12512 $5,340,170 whatever. The cost for water personnel services, and then we have the revolving funds for the demolition revolving account, public cemetery revolving account, senior center activity revolving fund, sidewalk revolving fund, police department traffic revolving fund, public library revolving fund, animal control revolving fund, public health sustainability revolving fund, the civic days revolving fund. We have the finance committee report. Councilor Di Natale, would you give us the oral report from the finance committee?
Oral report from the Finance Committee. We met this evening, June 26 at 7:30. 5 orders were adopted. 15212, appropriate $25,000, same to be credited to health, sanitary, landfill expenses and charge against available funds. That was unanimous. 15312, that the City of Fitchburg accepts the gift of $19,858 from Unitil Fitchburg Gas and Electric Light Company and allow the expenditure of funds from the gift for the reconstruction of various portions of Elm, Academy, and Johnson Streets. That was unanimous. 15412, appropriate $20,000 to be charged to fire personal services and charge against available funds. That was unanimous to give it leave to withdraw. 15512, that the City of Fitchburg approves the expenditure of funds from the Commonwealth of Mass Executive Office of Public Safety and Security Office grants for the FY12 pedestrian safety grant in the amount of $5,000 for the purposes of said grant. That was unanimous. And lastly, 156-12, that the City of Fitchburg approves the expenditure of funds from the Commonwealth of Mass Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, State 911 Department for the FY13 State 911 Department Support and Incentive Grant in the amount of $115,227 for the purposes of said grant. That was unanimous.
Accepted, the orders be adopted.
Motion made and seconded to accept the Finance Committee report. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? We have the Council as a whole special meeting report in front of you.
Move that the budget be approved and the orders be adopted.
Motion made and seconded to approve the FY 2013 budget. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? One in opposition. Councilors, we have an unnumbered order in front of us. If we would have a suspension of the rules to accept an unnumbered order. Motion made. Do I have a second? Second. Motion made and second to accept the unnumbered order. Kindly draw a council order to transfer $22,000 from reserve for snow and ice to DPW hazmat cleanup steam plant. This emergency funding is for the necessary cleanup costs with a contingency resulting from an oil spill at the old steam plant. Thank you sincerely, Mayor Lisa A. Wong. Motion made and second on suspension of the rules on the unnumbered order. Any discussion on the acceptance of the...
Mr. President.
Okay? We've already done one suspension.
We didn't vote on it.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion made and second to accept the order. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion made and second to adjourn. All those in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank